So recently, a journalist on the front lines of the Students for Fair Admission versus Harvard case named Kenny Xu wrote a book called An Inconvenient Minority. And the reason he named the book thus is because the success of the Asian American minority group is an extremely inconvenient fact for the worldview claims of critical race theory.
Critical race theory asserts that the world in America is divided into a racial caste system, whites on the top, blacks on the bottom, but they have no idea what to do with Asian Americans, because Asian Americans are a minority. You know, they have been discriminated against in this country, and yet they succeed and they achieve. And that I think inconveniences the critical race theory narrative today, and that's why I wrote this book.
You make the argument that if America is systemically racist, as many proponents of critical race theory believe, how is it that Asian Americans have flourished and in many cases overtaken whites in terms of level of education and socioeconomic status? So how is it? How is it that Asian Americans flourish in this country?
It has to do with culture. You know, Asian Americans study twice as many hours as the average American. Today, we always talk about the Tiger Mother. You know, that was Amy Chua's famous book. But it's not just Tiger Mother parenting. It's also strong two-parent family structures. It's a strong value on education. It's a love for hard work and for meritocracy. And that's at stake with critical race theory, because critical race theory is anti-meritocratic. It believes that merit is racist. So if policies like Harvard's discrimination against Asian Americans are allowed, guess who loses out? Well, it's the hardworking Asian Americans that work so hard to get their spot.
Now, Kenny Xu brings up an interesting question in this interview. Given that Asians in America are a minority, and they have suffered profound mistreatment and discrimination in American history, how is it that this group of oppressed people overcame their disadvantage and became arguably the most successful demographic in America today, even more so than white people? So how do critical race theorists deal with this extremely inconvenient fact? Easy. They simply assert that Asian Americans are actually white. In an article on New Discourses, Kenny Xu writes, "With the emergence of several racial groups that have come to be just as successful as whites, critical race theorists came up with the term white adjacency. Robin DiAngelo, author of the now infamous book White Fragility, defines it this way: the closer you are to whiteness, the term often used is white adjacent, you're still going to experience racism, but there are going to be some benefits due to your perceived proximity to whiteness." According to critical race theorists, Asian Americans are the most white-adjacent minority. They go so far as to say that Asians don't count as people of color, and even invented the term BIPOC specifically to exclude Asian and other, quote, white-adjacent minorities. The problem is that critical race theory implicitly defines every good societal outcome as white. Even if your family came from China or India, being educated and achieving a high degree of personal success is deemed, quote, white behavior. This is racist in multiple ways. Obviously, it puts Asian Americans into a white adjacent box that completely ignores their unique cultures and struggle. Furthermore, it implies by default that other races aren't as successful, talented, or educated. If being rich and successful are white characteristics, then doesn't the logic follow that being poor and lazy are black characteristics?
I think there's a very interesting question being posed as to whether we can just say that black people are going to be these people with rhythm, these people who don't deal in exactness, these people who are holistic, these people who can create hip hop, but it's going to be the white people who invent glasses and, transistors, et cetera. But black people are good the way they were before the Enlightenment. The idea is that the way we were as Africans, why don't we just preserve that? We'll cherry pick the things that whites invented, because you can't, of course, it's good that there are glasses, that there is glass, for example. But no, blackness means we're not going to get the real answers, that, we're not going to have standardized tests, that people are not going to be ranked on the basis of something that comes from these standardized tests. And I think that it needs to be posed as a question rather than seeping into our thinking without being questioned. Because the idea definitely seems to be Charlie Parker, yes, but Lord forbid that a black person also learn how to do calculus or be expected to, unless they're peculiar and that's the way that they really want to go. And it makes me extremely uncomfortable. I have to bring up Ibram Kendi, he has a passage, I think it's my least favorite passage of his, which is that maybe we should rank Black students on their desire to know. That's coming from this well, the idea that somebody saying, I would like to know this is enough. And we have to remember that Kendi writes that in all seriousness in books that are being read by, possibly billions of people. This doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for me at all. I will never forget an undergraduate Black woman who would have been about 20 years old, who was working in the diversity recruitment office. And remember, folks, I don't mean somebody 50. This is an undergraduate who's doing, some sort of work study job or something, working to help bring Black perspectives to Berkeley, one of the people who walks them around and makes them feel welcome. So she's an undergraduate Black girl. And she openly said to me that they were worried at the office that Black students who actually submitted dossiers that were the equal of whites and Asians, Black students who wouldn't need any preferences, wouldn't, and this is exactly what she said. I remember it. I remember how the sun was shining through my office window. She said they wouldn't be committed to a Black community at Berkeley. What she actually meant was that Black kids who are nerds they aren't culturally Black. And I don't go for it. I don't like it. W.E.B. Du Bois would have not understood this in any way. And that's what some of this is. If you're precise, you're not Black. I say, fuck that. Fuck it.
So critical race theorists looked at academia, and they looked at the traditional ways that they felt academics are supposed to behave. And they boiled it down to a few values that academics are supposed to have. And those values were to be objective, neutral, and balanced. And they say those values aren't shared American values or even shared worldwide academic values, but instead values specifically from the white world. So critical race theorists believe that if you, as an academic, try to be objective, neutral, and balanced, regardless of your skin color, your academic voice is white. If your skin color happens to not be white, it just means that you've integrated into the white world, and in this case, effectively lost your racial identity when it comes to your academic voice. So critical race theorists think that this is racist because they think it presumes the superiority, in this case, of white academic values. And they want to put forward their own race-conscious alternative that would be designed to be distinctively not white. And that's a voice that they grounded in the concept of authenticity. Authenticity here means resisting integrating into the pressures of the white world. So if you integrate into the white world, you're inauthentic. But if you remain true to yourself by resisting integration as someone that's not white, then you're authentic. Then they went further to define their authentic, non-white academic voice as specifically being subjective and political. So critical race theorists, as academics, intentionally reject being objective, neutral, and balanced, because that would mean that they're inauthentically white. So instead, they are expressly subjective and political.
Right. So this leads us to look at the premises of this political theory, which is very much contested, called critical race theory. So according to critical race theory, and this is in the own words of these critical theory theoreticians and proponents, the theory seeks to challenge the very foundation of the liberal order, which includes Enlightenment rationalism, constitutional neutrality, and rational thinking, liberal, traditional liberal principles such as equality, fraternity, and merit. So merit, this last point is very important. So traditionally, in America, we value this principle called meritocracy, or the merit-based principle, which literally states that you can be whoever you want. You can achieve your dream if you work hard and if you have initiative and if you follow the right steps. So that's a merit-based principle. And critical race theory as a thought revolution challenges the very assumptions of merit, the very assumptions of hard work, and accuse these traditionally good American values as racist, or as features of of systems of power and oppression. So in other words, when these values are dismantled or discredited as such, then they don't have any utility anymore. So we need to do away with academic selection. We need to do away with standardized tests, and it becomes a race to the bottom. And I tend to, classify the supporters of both the ethnic studies movement in California and also the broader critical race theory movement as ideologues and snake oil salesmen. So the bottom line, it is politically painful and socially as well painful to find real solutions to fix these problems of non-performance and achievement gaps. It requires consistent and bipartisan efforts to make real changes, not only in our schools, but also in our communities, especially in underserved and disadvantaged communities and in our family culture.
Parents of some of America's top public high schools fighting back against what they say is the new racism, admissions policies that discriminate against Asian Americans. A group of parents at Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology in Fairfax, Virginia, filed suit this spring after the school's board changed its admissions policies and process, replacing a rigorous race-blind entrance exam with a, quote, holistic formula that limited the number of Asian American students they accepted. Now, this story is playing out in other elite schools across the country as well. Listen, I've looked at the curriculum and some of these urban school systems, particularly in black neighborhoods and Hispanic neighborhoods. They're watered down, they're weak, they're designed for failure. Right. There's no way you could ever pass an entrance exam into these elite schools with these curriculums. So the same people that don't think you can take the tough courses in early grades are the ones who now want to cheat the Asian students who are excelling. It just seems crazy to me, Bill.
So they use race at every stage of the admissions process. And so Asian Americans are obviously the lowest downgraded based on Harvard's use of a personality score, where they grade Asians the worst on personality. That's how they justify it. And now we see today that Asian Americans have to score 450 points higher than a black person to have the same chance of admission to Harvard University. And so this is an ideology that penalizes success.
Harvard's own estimate said that if Asians were not discriminated against, they would be 43% of the student body. Now people are saying, well, is that too many Asians? Well, I say, I'm indignant at that claim. I'm indignant at the claim that Asians are all the same kind of person, they're all the same kind of faceless, test-taking robot with no personality. We have to look past race in this country. And I wrote this book hopefully to heal America and to bring Americans together in service of meritocracy.
In the end, critical race theory has no way to explain how Asians have been so successful in a country which is supposedly founded on the principles of racism, except to call Asian Americans de facto white people. By ignoring the meritocratic success Asian Americans have achieved, both as individuals and as a culture, the critical race theorists and ethnic studies advocates pushing equity into our schools and workplaces have engaged in the exact kind of race essentialism they say they are fighting against. In refusing to see Asian Americans as individuals and to allow them to be admitted into primary school and college programs based purely on their own merit, the proponents of CRT and equity advocates are admitting that Asians should be instead treated as a privileged collective whose only value comes from their group identity. What on earth could be more racist than that?